Hi, welcome back to How to D&D. We are going to talk about Ravenloft, the new book. It's been out for a little while. It's taken me a while to go through this book. In fact, I was almost contemplating not running anything at all, frankly, because I felt like there was just not enough time to actually go through everything. But I have changed my mind. I have far too many notes, and the rest of you are going to have to suffer as I go into probably way too much detail with regard to a book. Anyway, the sound seems to be working fine. We have people here. Hi, I'm Jerry. How's it going? Dankin, hello. Hi, Matt. Phoenix Rapunzel, how's it going? Jasper's here. Is it Lewis 3? And yes, we are ready to make it happen. I'll pull out my earplugs. My suggestion to you is grab some food, grab some drink, get settled down, make sure you are comfortable, because there is a lot to discuss in a book like this. Far more than I thought there really would be, but apparently I am wrong. Anyway, that doesn't matter. Let's get started. Hi, welcome to How to D&D. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. As you might have guessed, the topic for today is Scooby-Doo and what it's taught us. No, it's not actually, but you'll understand the Scooby-Doo reference as we go. There are some good things about the book we're going to discuss. This is Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. Is it terrifying? Let's answer that question. Let's go through it with a fine-tooth comb and give you everything you need to know about this book. And of course, I will try to be as impartial as I can, but like any person or normal human being, I am going to be biased to a certain degree because, like anything, it is just an opinion and you don't have to agree with me. Some of the things you might agree with me, some of the things you won't agree with me. But because there is so much material to cover today, I really am going to find it a struggle to try to make this a short video. It is going to take a little bit of time. So I spent weeks going over this thing, trying to figure out what it is that had upset me about this book and what I liked about this book. And what I can put it down to is that there is something going on here, obviously at Wizards of the Coast. It's been going on for a while, and I feel like we are reverting to a certain degree back towards Dungeons and Dragons 4E. We are trying to capture a bigger market. And so as a result of that, part of those elements exist in this book. Does this mean that this book is not terrifying and that this book isn't any good? No, that's actually not true. Okay, so I'm going to break down everything that I have sort of spotted so far and make it clear. So this is a review of Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft for Dungeons & Dragons 5e. Now the first section talks about haunted characters. And I thought that that was a really good sort of basic summary or concept behind how you might be running those sorts of campaigns or adventures. But then we'll get on because it does create some problems. The lineages. This is a new concept which includes more flexibility around the ability score increases while being in line with Dungeons & Dragons 5e race creation guidelines. The lineages will not appeal to all dungeon masters, but it's the direction that I think many players want races or species or lineages to go, and Wizards of the Coast is providing the mechanics for that. That's on page, I believe it's page 15. So let's just sort of open that up a little bit. I am not a fan of being able to have total flexibility with ability score increases. For me, I feel like that's moving too far away from the original game. And then the other aspect to it is it's too easy to exploit. It does mean that a lot of those guides around, what's the best race to take for this class, which one is it? I mean, all of those mean nothing if you start doing this sort of thing. So I can see where they're going with this. I did actually state quite some time ago when Tasha's Cauldron of Everything came out that the concept of lineages would bleed over into newer books. A lot of people said, no, it will be optional, you won't have to do it. And of course, you could still consider it optional here in this book, right? But as I would like to point out, it's a new direction that Wizards of the Coast is going in, and it is going to wind up being the staple or standard from now on. Unless, of course, you're the sort of person who decides, no, I don't want it, and you're able to get away with it, and your players don't revolt and then leave your group. So I am a little bit torn with lineages, so I'm not a fan of them. So I'm not going to say too much about that. Let's talk about some of the other lineages or race species options that are available. The Dhampir lineage is a revision or a revised race for players wanting to have a vampire character. That's essentially what it is. While trying to balance the dungeon master's fears of an overpowered character ability or character abilities. The Dhampir is exceptional, I would say, until you analyse that vampiric bite, which again relies on attacks using a constitution modifier, and that's going to frustrate players, okay? That's on page 16 to 17 of the book. Now, the Dhampir has appeared in the past. It was in Dungeons & Dragons 4e. It had the same type of mechanics as this particular Dhampir. So when I say I feel like there's a lot of mechanics being bled over from Dungeons & Dragons 4e into this, in fact, a lot of concepts from Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 are bleeding into Dungeons & Dragons 5e. I find this problematic because I also know that there used to be a vampire class. You could play a vampire, not just a Dhampir, which is sort of like a soft version of the vampire, right? But then, of course, you had to have the right dungeon master who would say, yeah, I'm all right with that. Fine, you can play that. That'll be all right. I've had a vampire class in my game before, and it does create problems because when you play a vampire character, there's the tendency to want to be the spanner in the works, or for your character to wind up being the ultimate villain at the end. And it's one of those things that players tend to sort of do, thinking that they are, adding to the story, and actually it sort of destabilizes things a little bit. But the Dhampir in its current form is probably not a big issue. Being able to climb on walls and ceilings is pretty good. You want to have that. And if you've got a ranged character, then you really don't have to worry about that vampiric bite. Who cares? Doesn't matter. Okay, so what about the hexblood? The hexblood lineage allows players to have characters with a mysterious witchcraft origin or background. That includes sort of a fair amount of character development risk. Now, I'll explain that in a second so that you don't get confused. The telepathic message, remote viewing, and the hex magic abilities are inspired concepts, in my opinion, that most dungeon masters will accept. I think that dungeon masters will see that and they'll say, yeah, I'm all right with that. That's fine. Now, let me explain to you part of my rationale with regard to playing a hexblood has some good benefits, absolutely. What I would say, though, is it has a fundamental element of risk in terms of how your character could develop. Because if the dungeon master decides they would like to follow through and your heritage of being related in some way to a hag, or hags get involved, you could easily wind up losing your character to the story beats, particularly if they call on you and you wind up with your character being transformed into a hag, which could happen, okay? So I would say to dungeon masters who are considering this particular option, personally, I think it's a good option, but I would also point out to the players, and players, you need to be aware of this as well. This is not a discussion that's just strictly for dungeon masters and not players. It's for everybody. And that is that there's a high probability, if you get the right type of dungeon master or the wrong type of dungeon master, that your character will wind up going down a dark route, which will lead to their downfall ultimately, and their transition from being a party member with with the characters and the other players to being a villain and a hag that they will fight and probably wind up destroying. Maybe. We'll see. Okay, that is definitely something that's there. So I have a lot of respect for a player who would consider this as an option because there is inherent risk at a narrative level. It's not mechanical, so it's not written in stone that will ever be called upon. But you could see it happen, right? Okay. The reborn... Oh man, the reborn lineage is a Frankenstein monster or creature or a sort of a revenant as a player option without being undead, essentially. I believe that's essentially what's going on here. The deathless nature and knowledge from the past life features are extremely useful. You know, the fact that you get those features really, really useful because what are they? They essentially, somebody has gone and stacked multiple race abilities into one lineage. When you look at it and you think, okay, where did that come from? Where did that come from? Oh my gosh. They just took a whole lot of stuff from a whole lot of different races and they stacked it into one lineage. So I can see a lot of players finding that mechanically appealing. I can see a Dungeon Master allowing this sort of character to occur or the reborn to exist if a character dies. If a character dies, I can see Dungeon Masters considering this as an option. Would they consider it starting out? Probably not, but a lot of this stuff is going to be utilised in Dungeons & Dragons Adventurers League, where you do not have a choice. You know, the guidelines for the season will be this, and players will want to play that or use those options, and they will get to do so. And that there isn't going to be a decision around. But, you know, if you are a Dungeon Master running Adventurers League games, you already know what that's like. You know what to expect, okay? If you're running your own home game, it's a different story. And the players probably will only select this option, I suspect, if it is utilised when their character dies, if they want to continue playing the same character, even if they have no memory of their past life. Because essentially, the ultimate aspect of your character, which is your memory and how you function and your personality, might very well be just eliminated by being a reborn. You lose all those aspects, which essentially means the only thing you retain is sort of the mechanical features of the character, and then what you look like. But what's inside is gone. The soul is still there. Possibly, maybe not, who knows, but you still don't have what makes up the character. Do you know what I mean? So I don't think that it's necessarily always going to be something that players are going to go straight for, even though it's mechanically advantage. It's an advantage to have them. It's an advantage to have a lot of the mechanics behind Reborn. And that's on page 20 to 21. Okay, so I've been pretty tame up to this point. We're going to get a bit hairy now. I'm afraid that you might find that I lose my voice and I get a little bit angry because I'm a fan of dark gifts. I used dark gifts in the Curse of Strahd. I've encouraged people to use dark gifts in the past. And as I was reading through this section, I became more and more angry. So let me sort of explain. So the dark gifts have been expanded to include curses, to include supernatural powers. Not quite so happy about that, and I'll explain. Rather than just a character death option. So you could use it for a character death option, you could use it as a curse laid on them, or you could basically use it as a supernatural power to make them a Super Saiyan. Maybe make them more powerful. No, I guess I wouldn't say Super Saiyan. I would say to make the character more versatile, more options, and yeah, in some cases more powerful. Now, Dungeon Masters might find these dark gifts useful to include in a darklord if they decide to create a stat block for the darklords, which for me, I would suggest you don't. And I would suggest you make them simply a narrative character and never a character that can be utterly destroyed. But that's just my personal sort of feelings around that. The dark gifts are player character features I would say they would require heavy modification to avoid just being a PC or a player character gameplay benefit, because they are ultimately there are more benefits than drawbacks to these things. Okay, the dark gifts really disappointed me because the drawbacks are narrative and story focused elements, which may be forgotten, okay, might completely be forgotten as you're playing through the game. It would be easy to overlook that. And then the benefits, there's usually 3 mechanical benefits in gameplay for every dark gift. These are things that make your character better than they were before. For me, that's quite lame. I feel like it's the lame duck section of the book. It makes me angry because I feel that dark gifts in the past, not all of them, but a good chunk of them, are much better than these. Why are they here? I suspect that they are here because when the Curse of Strahd was run through Dungeons & Dragons Adventurers League, they were put there because they wanted to have some ramifications for character death through the Curse of Strahd when Dungeons & Dragons was run as Adventurers League, okay? Then I would imagine that players we don't like these dark gifts, give us something that we like. So Wizards of the Coast has done that. These are going to be used from the get-go. You'll be able to pick these options at character creation, or you might be able to pick them up later on. There are things that, as a general rule, it would be a no-brainer that players would want to have them because it gives them more stuff, more tools, more toys. So I think that's partly what's going on. It also captures a much larger section of the market in terms of making money, okay? Because players want more stuff. You give them more stuff, they will pay for it. That means they buy this book because that is what's driving this. We need to put enough player options in here that players will buy it and not just Dungeon Masters because there's not enough of you. I'm really disappointed by this section. I feel like you are probably, if you're in your own home game, you are much better to use dark gifts for your NPCs and monsters or darklords rather than necessarily making them an option to players where then you have to upscale everything to compensate for their newfound tools and toys. So I dislike the section immensely. All right, let's talk about some of the subclasses, because there are some subclasses here. And I was sort of shocked at the nature of these subclasses. The first one, let's deal with the Bard College of Spirits. That thing is a mess. I haven't seen a subclass more of a mess than the Wild Mage, the Sorcerer. The Wild Magic Sorcerer is a mess in terms of a class. I mean, the Beastmaster also a pretty big mess. But this one takes the cake because of the nature of the features. The character archetype features are situational. They are poor abilities in many cases. And the key feature is the Spirit Tales table. It presents the worst chaotic random combat benefits that I can possibly imagine in a game. Okay? It makes no sense whatsoever to the particular archetype. It's not what I think people were looking for in a College of Spirits. I don't think that they were looking for anything like this. Now, let me explain that. Just give me some time. I'll get through all of this and then I'll go back, okay? So I'm going through my notes and then I will break it down. This class is missing the ability to talk with the dead. I do not mean the spell talk with the dead or speak with dead. I don't mean that kind of... I don't mean they have access to speak with dead, okay, a number of times a day. I mean that they can speak with the dead all the time, because that's, I think, what players would have been looking for. And as a Dungeon Master, I would never have had a problem with that. In fact, if they're talking with the dead, that means they're not trying to kill the dead. I'm happy with that. I think a lot of Dungeon Masters wouldn't have a problem. But that's not there. Okay. Being able to see spirits in their invisible form, when they're not physically visible in the material plane, and being able to shift. Now, I don't mean see invisibility, okay, for those of you wondering, no, that's not, I mean just see spirits when they are in their invisible form. And then being able to shift to the ethereal plane where the spirits are. I think that's what all players were kind of expecting from this. It's what I was expecting, and it's not here. Now, let me break it down in terms of when I mean travel to the ethereal plane, I do not mean that this character would be able to take their party members to the ethereal plane. No, that they would be able to, they would take the risk and travel there alone, then split the party. So they have to have a pretty good reason to do that, okay? And that would obviously be a level, a feature that you get at a much higher level. I think those are the things that people would have preferred. Now that spirit table, it's random. It's a random feature. That means that every time this feature gets triggered and we use it, we roll, and it, what you get randomly from the spirit tales table might not have any bearing whatsoever on the situation that you have in your battle or combat. I have an issue that they're almost all exclusively combat features and nothing else. I mean, most of the stuff for the College of the Spirits is combat stuff. We're talking about a bard here, and it's all pretty much combat stuff. Now, as you go up in levels, that means you get a bigger, wider range of things that you can get, okay? Because it's based off your, I believe it's based off your bardic inspiration dice. So at lower level, you're not going to get everything. As you go up in levels, you're going to wind up rolling a bigger dice, which means you get option, open up the number of random effects. Okay, so now it makes it worse. Now we finally, at some point, when we get to 14th level, we might have a modicum of control. But it's not that much control. So now we're rolling 2 dice, I believe. And if we manage to roll the same numbers on 2 dice, then we get to just pick what we want to do with it. But if we don't, we have to pick one or the other. Still incredibly random. For me, I would just ditch all that nonsense. I feel like that is just the silliest. It just doesn't make any sense. I don't even want to ever consider trying to provide you with a fix for this subclass, because I think it hit all of the wrong points that people were looking for. You'd have to rebuild the whole thing from scratch, and I'm not really in the mood for doing that. So I feel really sorry for players who are really looking for something that would be fun and interesting and relating to, engaging and interacting with spirits, rather than this. Okay, I've whined, I'm unhappy, and I'm moving on. Next one. I need to move faster, don't I? The subclass Warlock, the undead, is good for a Warlock. Now that doesn't mean it's a good subclass, because Warlocks, and most people don't play Warlocks purely right through, okay? They usually pick just a couple of levels in Warlock and they go and do something else. But for a Warlock, it's a good Warlock. In terms of being good, in terms of the other classes, the Warlock is easily exploited by multi-classing though, because one level of undead Warlock, just you get the form of the dead, or dread feature, which is like really good. The form of the dread feature is like, yeah, who would not want that? So I can see that being multi-classed for sure. Personally, for me, I don't like the subclass, as it has nothing built around raising the undead. Now, I know people are like, oh, Fred, are you talking about raising an army? Well, not necessarily raising an army of undead, but raising undead beings. It seems to be more around combat and the player being undead themselves, kind of, but not really. Kind of, but not really? It's weird, isn't it? I feel like it's weird. There's certainly... It doesn't. I don't like this. I don't like the subclass. I do believe there was something else that they put out that was kind of like this. I don't remember it specifically where it was, and if I remember, I'll let you know. And this particular subclass just does not have enough non-combat options, in my opinion. It's all just battle and combat. And I kind of think Wizards of the Coast has assumed that the only people who buy these books are the people who want to have combat options, and that's not true. Okay, all right, let's move on to the next bit. The optional background features in the book. There is a whole bunch of sort of existing backgrounds that are in different supplements or the player's handbook, and they have just the feature section. You know, it doesn't give you the whole background, it just gives you the feature section. In this book, it's a mixed bag, okay? Many of them are repeating existing backgrounds or background features that exist, or very specific and have situational benefits, and I did not like them. But the outstanding background here, or background feature, is the spirit medium. I think that's very good. I think it does exactly what players would want it to do. I think it makes sense for a dungeon master. They will understand why it would make sense to have that in their campaign. I like that one. That's pretty much the only one I did like. Just because it does what it's supposed to do. You know, you are interacting in your medium for spirits, and that's what it's doing. It actually has more related to spirits than the College of Spirits, which is like ridiculous. Okay, next. The horror characteristics that cover personality traits, ideals, bonds, flaws. They're comprehensive, with multiple ideas, with a D12 table, which is much more than normal. I really like this section. I think this is a very good section. It's not a huge section. I think it's like 2 pages. Okay. But normally we only get like a D6 or a D8 when it comes to breaking down personality traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws. But we get a D12, so that means we get significantly more. And a lot of them very much cover most of the aspects that you might be trying to be picking up and using in building a character. You could also, for those of you who are dungeon masters and not running a character, not a player in the game, you could use these for your NPCs. I've said it before, it is a very good tool. Backgrounds are an excellent tool for building NPCs, and I would use them in this case, particularly when you are a little bit lost. You don't have to roll randomly, you can pick the ones you like, okay? You do as you feel fit. It's a very good section. Very good section. Let's talk about the next lot. We actually have 2 backgrounds to discuss, all of which I believe I've seen before in different forms or variations. I'm a fan of backgrounds. I like backgrounds. I think backgrounds are great. I like races. I like it when people play different races and backgrounds. So I was really on board for this. The Haunted One background is not new. Okay, it is reprinted from the Curse of Strahd. But makes sense for the Domains of Dread. Okay, it does make sense for the setting in a campaign you would be running. There have been some additions to the skill proficiencies and languages, but the Heart of Darkness remains the same. Now, the Heart of Darkness feature is a very good feature. It reminds me of the folk hero one, the feature that you get when you're a folk hero. It's very similar to that. It's just got a slightly different twist to it. So it's kind of repetitive, but it's still very good, okay? Essentially, in the Curse of Strahd, you only got 1 skill and 1 language. Now you get 2 skills and 2 languages, I believe. So I don't have a problem with that, really. You know, more languages is always nice. Another skill, there's 1 more skill. I suppose that's not a big deal. To be fair, there were issues when this thing went out. People had a bit of a complaint about the Haunted One in the Curse of Strahd because it didn't follow the standard building and design of all of the other backgrounds, which would often go 2 skills and 1 language or a tool proficiency or something like that. So they've tried to give you more. Players are trying to give the players more. Okay, now. Here's the problem with doing something like that. Yes, the background is suitable for this particular campaign. But if you're a dungeon master and you're running through the Curse of Strahd and you decide, I want to continue running my campaign in the Domains of Dread, but I want to go somewhere else, and you buy Van Richten's Guide to Everything, the chances are you already have the Curse of Strahd, right? So now you have 2 versions of the Haunted One. I would be kind of annoyed if I had the Curse of Strahd and then I picked up this book and then I saw this same background in the book I already had. Now, if you're buying Van Richten's Guide to Everything, sorry, sorry, I can't help myself. Everything's everything nowadays. Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. It's not a big deal because you wouldn't know. You know, as far as you're concerned, you've got a good deal. It's something new for you. But if you already have the Curse of Strahd, I would be miffed. I'd be kind of miffed a lot. But then again, if you never liked the Haunted One and the Curse of Strahd, and this is better, you probably prefer this version of the Haunted One. So I don't like it when they reprint stuff. I feel like they could have done something else, you know, because most people are going to get the Curse of Strahd and Van Richten's Guide to Everything if they're running those types of games anyway. So why repeat material? It wasn't necessary. Okay. The investigator background might be a repeat from the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, but I'm not sure exactly because I don't have the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, and I don't know if it's an exact duplicate. I think it might be kind of a version that's been adjusted or modified. So again, a reprint to a certain degree, I think. I'm not sure of that. The feature official inquiry. Man, this fleshes out every aspect of being a detective a player might want. I think it's probably one of the best features I've ever seen in a background. I was really impressed. It had all the marks. It really opened things up. Maybe Dungeon Masters will feel that it's opened things up too much, but I was happy that they had done something like that because it made perfect sense for an investigator. While the skill and tool proficiency fit the background. So all of those skill and tool proficiencies do fit the concept of being an investigator. It's a very good background, okay? None of the backgrounds, the Haunted One and the Investigator, they're not bad backgrounds. They're pretty good. Okay, let's talk about the Horror Trinkets table. It offers 100 very unique and mysterious, magical, wondrous items. Now, they don't need to be necessarily magical. They could be non-magical. I would say mysterious, non-magical knickknacks. Now, they can be used as talismans. They can be used as a domain access key to get in and out of a domain. They could be used as a very odd, magical, wondrous item, or they could just be used as a knick-knack, something that's, you know, character-driven and relates to the character's past or potentially the future, whatever, just as we've done with trinkets in the past. What I like about this section, the horror trinkets, is it uses trinkets in a much more versatile manner. It opens up a lot of ideas. It doesn't really talk a lot about that, unfortunately, but I think it's, you know, page 36 to 37, it's a very good section. I was really happy. I think they did an excellent job with it. The potential of the trinkets is mostly hinted at, so you kind of have to pull it apart. I think it should have been developed more, discussing more about how you could use trinkets in different ways in your game. But it's definitely a major tool for the player and the dungeon master. Everybody is going to benefit from the horror trinkets as far as I'm concerned. The section on creating a darklord is full of many useful questions that help develop a complex NPC or non-player character. It has 2 villainous random tables of ideas, which is good to have. Now, this should be enough information for an experienced dungeon master or a dungeon master who likes homebrewing, who also has access to other Dungeons and Dragons supplements, probably around Ravenloft stuff, or even some of the other books, potentially. Unless, of course, you're the sort of person who doesn't really need Wizards of the Coast's help and you'll be fine on your own. But for a beginner or an intermediate dungeon master, they might struggle without some tables of ideas related to the Darklord creation questions, because there really isn't enough there to help you. Now, what I will say is if you were to comb through the book as a whole, you will find charts and tables that kind of relate to those questions already. Not all of the questions, but some of the questions. that would help fill out those questions for you. You will also have to go and check out information, other supplements, and the Dungeon Master's Guide to actually get everything you need. And then, of course, you're going to make a little bit more up because it won't all be there. I feel like this section should have been more involved and more in depth. You know, things like a darklord it's like the major aspect of anything, okay? It's a major aspect of any kind of book that you put out is a NPC, and a villain is like the most important one. So you can't try to save space here. And they kind of feel like they saved space. Okay, another drink of water, and I hate to say it, I'm only halfway through. I have a lot of notes here, although I think the later notes are very short. Okay, customizing your own domains of dread does exactly what it needs to do, with comprehensive questions, a bucket loads of answers in the form of random tables, which you don't have to use randomly, you can just select. There's so much vital information for adventure creation. Dungeon Masters will not be disappointed by the genres of horror. Okay, the Domains of Dread section looks short, and then you go and you have a look at the genres of horror, and that fills in a lot of the questions that you might have asked or being told by Wizards of the Coast to ask about your domain, and it fills in the gaps, and it does a pretty good job. Maybe not everything, but it does a pretty good job. I was actually very happy with this section. Who would have guessed? The genres of horror is excellent, as I said. It covers different types of horror, such as body, cosmic horror, dark horror, folk horror, ghost horror, gothic horror, disaster horror, occult detective horror, psychological horror, and slasher horror. Most of the horror types in the genre section are broken up into they're on tables usually, so you get a section, there's just a little paragraph and then a table, and it'll give you definitions of the type of horror. It gives you important questions to ask, pardon me, typical monsters you might expect in that type of horror genre, the kinds of villains you might come across, the torments that might be involved in that domain, or in that type of horror story, the types of settings. It gives you adventure sites and plots. Yes. Now, I wouldn't say plots as in the whole story, but maybe adventure hook to lead into a plot in some cases. Now, most of those sections on the different types or genres of horror are quite extensive, and they give you lots of really good information. There is a bit at the back where they obviously decided they weren't going to spend too much time. The book was getting too big, and you get other horror genres, and basically you get like half a page, I think it is, on each one. It's not enough. No, frankly, I didn't think it was enough. Nowhere near enough to be useful to you. Okay, and that is the later types of horror. I think slasher horror, psychological horror, occult detective horror, and I think it's disaster horror. Is it disaster horror? I think that is all. Those are the ones that don't get very much play. They don't get expanded as much as they probably needed to be expanded. Okay, so that's probably a bit of a bummer for some of you, but there is a lot of really good stuff there. The information on various domains of dread is well summarized and usually includes a world map. Not always, but usually there is one. The domains follow a sensible format, would you believe it? You get an overview, you get domain features, you know what the domain's features would be, the kinds of settlements or sites they have there, role-playing the Darklord is discussed, there are adventure hooks, and there are specific domain or Darklord tools. Now I can't specify exactly what that means, because for every domain there's a different focus. And so at the end of those domains, what they've done is they've given you what they think you'll need to build out stuff. Surprisingly, Barovia has a lot of extremely useful information on Irina. for those of you who are looking for more information, how to build it out, they do actually provide you with additional tools in this book. Now, they do that with a lot of the domains. Unfortunately, Sithicus, the largest domain of dread, is not in this book. It's missing. It's not covered in the book at all. Why? I'm not sure exactly. So Lord Soth is not there. I think a lot of people would have liked to have an updated map of Sithicus, particularly as it is the largest domain of dread, and yet it's not there. I don't understand why. What I will say, for those of you who want to jump on this and tear it to pieces, it would be unreasonable to expect Wizards of the Coast to be able to put all of the domains of dread into one book from every supplement that's ever been put out and have it all there, complete. Okay? I mean, it just physically isn't possible. The book would be enormous. There are so many supplements to Ravenloft that have come out over the years. So it would be unreasonable to expect everything in the book. So don't give them a hard time because they didn't put everything in there. I think maybe one of the smaller domains of dread could have been left out, and putting in Sithicus would have been a better idea. I agree with that. I think Sithicus should have been included, and they would have popped out one of the other ones that are smaller, that are less known. Okay, but they didn't do that. I don't know what to say. I just don't know what to say about some of the decisions that they make. But that actually happened. The types of domains are compiled from multiple supplements covering horror cliches. And look, Dungeons and Dragons has been doing. Gary did this for years. Okay, everybody's been doing it for years. Just take stories from somewhere else and pull it into Dungeons and Dragons, and then stamp an IP all over it. And you get your Dracula story, which is your Curse of Strahd, and Strahd von Zarovich. You've got the Illithid Nightmares. What could be worse than an elder brain that has really sort of lost it completely and become desperate? So you get the Illithid Nightmares. You get the political corruption. You get the Carnival of Terrors. You go to a carnival and what could possibly go wrong? Lots of things can go wrong. You get a doomed world that you can't save. You get a masquerade of deception. Masquerade ball, masks. Nobody's actually showing their true form, their true colours, their true personality, their true motivations. So you've got the masquerade concept there, which is like basically a big ball. You got the zombie apocalypse. I'm kind of sick of the zombie apocalypse. Zombie movies and stories are like a dime a dozen. You get the Desert Pharaoh Tyrant. You get wizard experimentation domains. You've got a deadly dream world. Did you like the Freddy Krueger movies? Here we go. An endless war. Imagine a domain where there's just endless war and it never stops. What about a lycanthrope nation trying to turn itself into an empire? That would cause problems. Frankenstein is here. Basically the story of Frankenstein. It is just repurposed and reflavoured. You've got the ghost world. You have an unstoppable plague. Yes, probably not the thing that anybody wants to do right now. I totally get. You get the witch bargains. There's a lot of witches. They set bargains. You might not like them. And then you get jungle survival. So they've tried to hit many of the different types of horror that you might want to engage in and present to your players and make stories out of, or adventures out of, because sometimes it's not about the story, it's about setting up the elements to the story or adventure, and then the actual story as it unfolds is written by the players, not the dungeon master. I know a lot of people struggle with that concept, but I don't think this is bad stuff. I think when you take all of those different domains into account, they've probably covered everything about horror that you needed to know or wanted to know. I think it's all there. Okay. The smaller sections on the other domains of dread, they're very brief. like very, very brief. And I would say almost mostly useless to you. I think some of the smaller domains that they put in there sort of became like filler, and could have put Sithicus there. We could have just eliminated those and just, let's just put Sithicus there, but it didn't happen. So yeah, there are some domains of dread which are just big piles of poop, unfortunately. They just don't give you enough. You'd have to do too much work or do a lot of research. The advice on running gothic or horror-themed adventures is a mixture of great advice, conflicting advice, stupid advice, and guidance pandering to a modern, social, politically correct, trending propaganda that will maximize market profits while hopefully not offending anybody at the same time. I know you're wondering what the heck I mean, but we'll get there. Dungeons & Dragons has never done horror roleplay games very well, okay? So if you read through this section as a dungeon master and you get confused by the advice, I would not be surprised. I don't know what to say. It is hard. How do you manage to mess up something like that? I'll tell you how you manage to mess up advice on presenting anything regarding horror. You say everything that you could possibly say, covering all of your bases. My employment contract is like that. So you essentially have said everything, and you wind up contradicting yourself, and you wind up at some point just coming out with just really stupid advice. So let me just break that down, because I know a lot of people are like confused now and wondering what the heck's going on. So I better make it clear. So first off, great advice. Session 0. Yes, you should have a session 0. Absolutely. If you ask questions, and you probably should, about what the players have as real phobias, don't use their real phobias in the game. Totally agree. That's great advice. Okay. Conflicting advice. Conflicting advice is saying dim the lights because it adds atmosphere to the game, and therefore, you get them more immersed into the adventure and the game and the story. Okay, and then saying, keep the lights on because people might not be able to see their character sheet and might disengage from the game because you've dimmed the lights. There's a lot of advice like that in this book, where they say one thing and then they say another thing. So you're supposed to make it scary, but we don't want, we want to make sure that players don't want to die all the time. If we start asking questions about character death from players, like, how do you feel about character death? Well, like, I don't really want my character to die. Not all players are like that, though, to be fair. But if you start doing that sort of thing, you take out those potentials for character death. It doesn't mean that character is dead, doesn't wind up coming back, but, we'll go into that some other time. So there are other aspects to this where they start giving you advice that is conflicting. And then you'll wind up with a dungeon master looking at this and like, what am I supposed to do? They said this, but they also said this. So which one do I pick? I'll go and ask my players. Is that necessarily going to solve the problem? I can assure you that if you ask your players the best way to run a horror, it won't be a horror adventure. It'll be something else, okay? Easily it'll become something else. Then there's stupid advice. Now, stupid advice is when you tell somebody they should do something a particular way, and that's that, rather than presenting it as an option and explaining the pros and cons of doing that. And there is a lot of that taking place in here, in this book. It's almost as if somebody has decided, as I said, to try and cover all of their bases and just tell everybody everything. What's on the left side of the fence and what's on the right side of the fence, to ensure that they haven't left anything out. Then there is a box text section. There's a sidebar section that's highlighted. And I read through this and I was like, okay, here we go. Now, I am not familiar with all of the ins and outs of this sort of stuff. From what I could tell from this section, it is probably inspired by fear of social media groups that target big companies who have IPs that are producing products, and it's usually the feminist movement. Not all there are different elements of that. Okay, I think people will refer to it as woke. There's the feminist movement, and then there's the social justice movement, which, see, I'm in a social welfare country, so I believe in social justice, but the social justice movement, I feel, is like looking at all the small things rather than the big things for me. So I just don't really care about this or that sort of stuff. So I feel like they've tried to include and tell you that you should run a game that includes minorities, avoid stereotypes, cliches, which then conflicts with some of the other aspects of their advice, which talk about using cliches. And in fact, they utilize many cliches in this book themselves. I saw this and I was like, okay, so why is this done? Why have they done that? Why are they saying you should do that? They're saying that because of fear, okay? And I totally understand fear in terms of a big business not wanting to be absolutely pounded by any organization on social media, because let's try to avoid that. Is it driven by some of the members of the Wizards of the Coast team? Possibly. See, I don't have an issue with any of that sort of thing, but I do have an issue with people being told that they should do it this way. And I do have an issue with it really trying to sanitize everything, because really right now, we call this the age of censorship. Let's call this just the age of censorship, right? So when I saw this, the images that passed through my mind were of just bedlam. Like, who would know what to do with all of this? Okay? So when you see that section, look at it, read it if you want, and then move on. And whether you want to use it or not use it or not, that's completely up to you. But it is only a small section in there, thankfully. Oh dear. You kind of have to, when you give advice, you have to commit yourself to something. You can't just pick everything and decide that's going to cover all of our bases. Anyway, there is a brief description on Ravenloft props being used as game tools, such as the Taroka deck, that's the card deck, and the spirit board. That includes the spirit board in the back and the thing that you put on the spirit board if you wanted to sort of use it as a prop, which you can. But then it references you to the adventure Curse of Strahd, because there's no real information on the Taroka deck in there. No. You have to go and buy the Curse of Strahd and get that information, which is in the back of the book. Well, yeah, why? Why Wizards of the Coast? Why do that? There's simply not enough information for Dungeon Masters on the Taroka card deck in this book. You would have to get the Curse of Strahd to have any chance. And even in the Curse of Strahd, it doesn't give you enough information to really do it well. You really need to sort of think between the lines. It's just a toolbox without the instructions for the toolbox, if that makes sense. Now, with regard to the spirit board, I feel like the spirit board is probably not going to require that much advice and guidance around. There is an adventure in the book that actually uses the spirit board, so maybe that's supposed to give you some examples to give you a better idea, but it's there. We've got those things. There's no index, which would have been very useful for monster stat blocks and adventure element tables, particularly since there are so many different types of adventure element tables in this book, covering all sorts of different things. You would have to find the right table that you were looking for. It would take quite a bit of time. You'd have to sort of page mark everything. You're going to have little sticky things falling off your book all the time. So Index, Wizards of the Coast is prone to this. They've always been a shocker. I think probably as a result of laziness, not giving themselves enough time in terms of a release date, and as a result they decide, I will just leave out the Index, which is not a smart move. So big thumbs down, Wizards of the Coast, for no Index yet again. There is one adventure called the House of Lament in here. So if you're looking for an adventure that's actually pre-made and all ready to go, there's one here. It's a cliche horror house adventure with a female Dracula backstory, basically. They've taken the story of Dracula, made that character a woman, and then they've chucked all of that into a haunted house. I would say this adventure is suitable for intermediate and experienced dungeon masters rather than a beginner dungeon master. This adventure does a reasonable job. It does a reasonable job of presenting a ghost story to you as an adventure rather than a Ghostbusters action movie. Now, if you know do you know what I mean? I mean, you are getting a story or an adventure that's more about exploration and social interaction and the other aspects of Dungeons and Dragons rather than just going around killing everything, okay? That's not the focus for this. And the random tables in here are not just lists of monsters for you to fight. No. They are ghost events, things that will happen. I think this is actually a pretty solid adventure for Wizards of the Coast, because they don't do adventures that great, without it winding up being a Ghostbusters action movie where we pound ghosts into the ground and trap them in little boxes and like show just how good we are. So it does a reasonable job of doing that. Okay, so it's probably worth your time to look at. The monster lore and some of the art is very nasty, very, but not everything in there is nasty. The monster stat blocks are full of boring mechanics as far as I can tell. It's indicative of what Wizards of the Coast tends to do, and third-party publishers just do it better. Kobold Press, I'm looking at you. But there are many monsters with damage immunities that magic weapons can't overcome. I like that. I like that they've done that. That's not always the case, but there's a lot like that. There's also no stat blocks for the darklords, which I think is very smart. Being able to actually kill one of the darklords would have diminished the fearsome impact that darklord has. If it's just another darklord we're going to vanquish, it kind of loses some of the elements of fear. Now, if you want to build your campaign around destroying darklord in a particular domain, you'll have to build it yourself. There is aspects of or guidance around, okay, for this darklord, use that stat block from that section of the book or from somewhere, wherever it is, okay, and then make some adjustments. Essentially, that's what they're trying to get at. But you don't actually specifically get stat blocks for the darklords. It would have made the book quite a lot bigger, I would imagine, if they'd done that. And I don't think it would have been a smart idea, because Strahd is like 1 page, is it 2 pages? It might be 2 pages. 2 pages of information. Would have been massive. Okay, the artwork is a combination of really creepy monsters or images, and then you get your modern cartoon Scooby-Doo style pictures, sanitized for a younger audience. I was looking at some of this and I was thinking, ooh, nice, that's cool, that is a bit creepy. And then I was like, oh, hang on, I feel like, hang on, is this, oh no, it doesn't say, oh, Van Richten's Guide to Scooby-Doo. Okay, all right, okay, no, it has been sanitized. So what did that sort of bring up in me when I was looking at this? I was thinking, oh, Scooby-Doo, all the Scooby-Doos, I mean, sitting down and watching Saturday morning or Sunday morning cartoons, Scooby-Doo, the Addams Family, the Munsters, which wasn't a cartoon, it was just a sort of a fun romp, horror-themed comedy, not really action, that sort of thing. Had some stories. It was like a sitcom. What else that sort of reminded me of? It really... Count Chocula, Sesame Street, The Count. You know who I'm talking about. It was reminding of me. Even the there are elements, but not a lot. There are elements at time where you kind of feel like you might be going into hammer horror, but not really. It's sort of like, it didn't quite go over the line. So it's a strange combination of artwork. But I understand why they're going here, because, you know, when you start putting stuff in a book that is sort of horrific, then parents freak out, and then that means that that younger audience you're trying to capture won't go and buy the book. And that's really, when you look at the title, the cover itself is really designed for a much younger audience rather than the older audience who are really wanting horror in the first place. I don't necessarily think that horror, Dungeons and Dragons, is what kids really want, or even teenagers really want necessarily. Maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong. I'm not a teenager anymore. What I do know is, as an adult, as a kid, and as a teenager, I used to love the fighting fantasy books, those pick your own path books, and the artwork was all black and white and pencil. It was highly detailed, and it showed you images that made you chill. Like, you're like, oh, that's scary, that's nasty. And then you're like, I should not show my mum this because she is going to get very upset. But that's not in this book. I miss those days. I feel like we need a publisher who's willing to do that. Although they probably wouldn't last long because somebody would burn them to the ground on social media. Okay, this book is designed for players and dungeon masters, but I think the dungeon master is clearly the focus for this book. There are many horror roleplay game tools in here. There are rules, there are ideas that appear to be player options. A lot of the stuff appears to be player options, okay? A lot of the lineages appear to be player options, and for Dungeons & Dragons Adventurers League they would be. The dark gifts appear to be player options. A lot of obviously the backgrounds appear to be player options. And it goes on, you know, horror trinkets, player options. But actually they're not, because a lot of that stuff in there requires a dungeon master to have some sort of level of discretion in terms of what they include in their game, and quite often dungeon master approval. And the text in the book actually states as such, which is good. Not always, but most of the time it does state you need to seek approval from your dungeon master to use these options. And then you could say, well, that's always the case with everything. But I think in this case, it's even more the case than it was before. Now, I feel like if you wind up with something like the lineages, you're probably not going to have too much problem with your dungeon master picking these and saying, yes, these are all good. I don't think they're going to have too much trouble with the the different subclasses that are offered, because they're not that great. I don't think you're going to have too much of an issue with something like the horror characteristics. I think they'll be fine with all of that. When it comes to dark gifts, I think a lot of dungeon masters will say absolutely no, or they'll modify them or strip them apart and break them into pieces. And I think that's probably what you need to do with this, is you probably need to take this book and consider it a big toolbox full of a whole lot of stuff that I don't necessarily want, and a whole lot of stuff that I do want, and just rip it apart. So consider it a big engine that somebody decided to modify and put too many different, you know, you've got an extra air filter here and a pot plant on top and a few other things that sort of don't make any sense, and you just rip it apart and pull it into its tiny little bits until you want the bits you want, and then you're all good. This book doesn't create dread in me or fear. It certainly doesn't terrify me at all, not one iota. And I do feel like the next video that I do in the future is definitely going to be how to run a Curse of Strahd Scooby-Doo style adventure. Because now I have all the tools. Now, for those of you who are wondering if I'm saying this is the worst book out there, no, it's not the worst book out there. Am I saying you should buy it? Nah. Okay, should you buy it? Should you not buy it? Really, that's up to you. I've told you what I think ultimately are the good aspects of it and the bad aspects of it, and hopefully you can make your own decision around that. And you're got to have to make your own final decision around that. Okay, so we have covered everything that I had hoped that I would be able to cover. To finish off, let's return to Scooby-Doo. If you found this video helpful and informative, fantastic. I actually have a series of videos on the Curse of Strahd, which aren't really Scooby-Doo-like, and I'm sure you will actually find quite useful. There is one for players as well, not just the Dungeon Master. I have also hundreds of videos for players and Dungeon Masters covering every aspect of Dungeons & Dragons, specifically Dungeons & Dragons 5e, but a lot of other aspects to the game as well. If you want to support the channel so I keep doing video content like this, you can through Patreon, the Amazon affiliate links down in the description, the merchandise shelf underneath all of my videos, or just watch my videos, that's fine too. Make sure to share, like and subscribe, hit the bell button to be notified when I go live, and I go live every week. And when I publish new videos. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. And everybody thought I was gone, but I'm not. I am not gone. I do need to put my eyes on. I am going to have to be very quick. I'm supposed to be somewhere in less than an hour, and I need to get organized. So, unless you write down hashtag question, I will probably not read your comments, okay? It just isn't going to be possible. Can't do that and that, so go hashtag question dot please. I would say that you need to have some sort of censorship to a certain degree with what stuff you put out. But there's a point where it gets a bit too much. And if you're going to deal with horror, then just deal with horror. And if you're not going to deal with horror, then don't deal with horror. But that's not necessarily going to work in every case, is it? No, not at all. No, because businesses want to make money and they want to put out stuff that has that kind of theme. And look, this book probably made a bucket load of money for them. I imagine they have made so much money off this. So let's move through here very quickly. I said hi to Dankin. Matt's here. Phoenix Rapunzel. Jasper. Lewis 3. How's it going? Fred Daniel. Hello. How's it going? Pat Sherwood. Now Pat Sherwood is a patron. For those of you who are unaware, Pat is supporting me, which is always very helpful. Thank you very much. Hello. Darren Stanfill, how's it going? Who else we got here? Overboard DM. Now, Overboard DM, that's Joe. Joe's been basically hanging out in my streams for a long time. He's got his own YouTube channel, Miniatures Terrain. Go and check him out. Hello, Oscar. Now, I think Oscar's probably run more Curse of Strahd than anybody I know. He's done a lot of games. Joe, I'm not necessarily going to say that, but I think that they are falling back into the same old trap that they've always have. Wizards of the Coast has got a tendency to fall into the trap of trying to just replicate 3.5 and 4e, and I think we're heading back that way. Yeah, I'm not so. I actually just find the word difficult to say. I think that's the cycle for me. Other than that, what's that, Jasper? I brought this book as a get well gift for my friend. Oh, okay, well, good. I'm glad. Hopefully they like it. Constantinios. I've probably butchered your name. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, they are very complicated. You're right. Yes, the dark gifts in the book are extremely complicated, but you could break them apart to make them work for you if you really wanted to. I do feel like they just don't have a lot of... I think you'd actually probably find a lot of the older dark gifts more useful that Dungeons & Dragons Adventurers League used, rather than using the stuff that's in the book. I know that sounds weird, but that's true. It's true. Honestly, it's true. um, oh, it made him mad. Oh no. So you, dear. It's funny. That's pretty funny. Stick to the flowers. Yeah, flowers, balloons, chocolates. That's the one. Flowers, balloons, chocolates. Absolutely. Well, money is nice, yes. It depends if they don't have any money. If they don't have any money, you can give them money. Zenov, I agree with you with regarding the dark gifts. I was disappointed they had no downsides. Yes, so I recommend to combine dark gifts with curses for a mechanical downside. Yeah, which of course you don't have any mechanical downsides in the in the book to include into these dark gifts, so you'd have to make your own or use some of the older ones. Okay, Dankin. I had a character die, and I feel there needs to be some cons attached to coming back. Yes, that's right. There should be. The dark powers demand something back. Exactly. I think that was the intention. That was always my driving factor. When I made a video called Character Death and Dark Gifts for the Curse of Strahd, I did always emphasize the concept of there being a consequence that the players would not like, that they would have to work towards getting rid of. Okay, and I think that is important when you're dealing with a dark gift. Otherwise, let's not talk about it being a dark gift. Let's just call it a supernatural power, because essentially what you are getting are supernatural powers. So it's a section of the book that really messed up bad. Really messed up bad. Vulnerability to fire damage. Yeah, that certainly would be one thing to do. Okay, so it looks like you guys are sharing ideas about how to sort out the dark gifts. So I feel like there are quite a few people who are fairly vocal and throwing out some good ideas there, which is great. Yeah, okay, so Phoenix Rapunzel. I was excited for the College of Spirits, but then when I read through it, it was very disappointing. I totally understand why you would have been disappointed. And I know exactly when people look at that and they see the name College of Spirits, I know exactly what, and they're thinking Bard, because the Bard is versatile, right? Not necessarily versatile in terms of combat. They're just able to do lots of really cool things, and they can fill lots of roles when they need to. And if you multi-class them, they become even more powerful, particularly if you know what you're doing. But I know what people were looking for, which is why I mentioned those three different things. You know, being able to talk to the dead, being able to see the undead spirits, and being able to travel to the ethereal plane, even on not taking everybody with you, but just being able to do that sort of thing. Yeah. How to D&D Guide to Everything. Yeah, okay. Let's not make that book. I wouldn't buy it. I highly recommend checking out the Haunted One background. It makes a character super dynamic, and it doesn't have to only be used in a horror campaign. Yep. I don't think there's anything wrong so much. I don't actually think there's anything wrong with the Haunted One in this book. It just has a little bit more. You know, frankly, one extra skill when everybody else had 2 skills and you had 1 skill in the Curse of Strahd. I mean, it makes sense. I don't have a problem with that at all. Hi, Nick. How's it going? I always thought Tasha's Guide to this book would be considered a homebrew helper. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. You got your Tasha's book yesterday. Can't wait to play Cyanite or Way of Mercy. Ah, yes, I can understand you liking the Way of Mercy. I haven't broken down a lot of Tasha's subclasses simply because I need somebody else to help me do that, and right now I'm just trying to work through book reviews. But I won't be dungeon mastering forever, and you'll probably find that I'll start talking about player stuff a lot more in the future. Although I will probably, because I have a tendency to talk more about spells, because I like playing spellcasters. But we'll see. There might be some Dungeons and Dragons Adventurers Gear stuff in the future. All the stuff that I'm still struggling to figure out. Before you even get to the section, I am disappointed by the monster section. I expected more. Yeah, I totally understand why you mean by them. I was a little disappointed too. I feel like you would have to do so many modifications to those monsters. It is a shame because it shouldn't be happening at this point. They should be getting their stuff together. Jasper, what do you got here? Goo Clock, whose patron was, I don't know what that means. Milestone powers, the body would become more and more misshapen. Oh, okay. I think you're talking about something. The carnival is pretty cool. I like the carnival. I like that. So there is an adventure by Paizo called the Carnival. I think it's called the Carnival of Terror or something like that. I've run the adventure before. It's quite a good one. You could pick that up and just convert it for Dungeons and Dragons 5e, which frankly means there's not much to do other than change out the stat blocks. I mean, that's really, you don't have to do very much of anything. Yeah, more detail on some of those aspects could be very helpful, but I think the problem is they just don't, you're trying to put too much into one book, which is why they probably haven't given you as much as you might have liked. There is, I believe there's a supplement that's on the carnival. There's one, I believe, and that book is, pretty extensive. I'm glad you enjoyed this. I'm glad it was helpful to you, Jasper. If you thought it was cool, that means you'll come back for the next one. Just think Gary didn't have the internet. Just books and personal experience. Yes. Can you imagine otherwise? Have you played Run Basic D&D? No, but I have run basic D&D adventures using 4e and 5e, okay? But I haven't actually played basic D&D. I'm moving more and more towards that possibility, though. That might actually happen. I don't know when, but I feel like that's likely to happen eventually. If I ask my players, I'm conflicted, and it's not okay with child abuse. How do I run Curse of Strahd? Laugh out loud. Yeah, exactly. The reality is you do need to be... Hi, Jerry. I see that. Wizards of the Woke. To be fair, I don't think that there's so much in here in terms of the feminist movement that you need to freak out. And I would like to point out too that every time they make a movie that features a woman in a superhero role or as the main feature of an action movie or something like that, I buy those, even if they're no good, even if they're... To be fair, when you put out stuff, there's a lot of really bad stuff that feature men and a lot of really good stuff. And the reality is that you have to make a lot of really bad stuff to get the good stuff as well. So I don't really necessarily worry too much about that sort of thing, but it is there, okay? Make everybody 18. Make everybody 18. You can only buy this book if you're 18, and then we can put whatever we like in here. You're right. There is child abuse in the Curse of Strahd. So look, I have friends, I know of people who have kids, and they would never run the Curse of Strahd for them. It's not the right book for them. Too soon. Wait until they get older. Trying to voice or create atmosphere, lighting, music gets annoying for everyone over time. I suggest moments of atmosphere or doing voices. Yeah, Matt, there is good advice there, and there's bad advice there, and then there's conflicting advice, and then there's just stupid stuff. But like I said, it's a catchment of let's put everything out there so that we can't get into trouble. Okay, which is what they've done. The Age of Intolerance. Okay, Fred, I'll go with that. Sure. It's weird because the movement is trying to get people to be more tolerant, but it's actually presenting itself as being intolerant, and its execution. Strange, isn't it? Okay, Zeno, what do you think of the changes to the Vastini? I didn't care. I really didn't care. I was personally okay until they were given the ability to travel among the planes due to their kindness towards others. Why would? Yeah. Well, I I think that's a bit of a nonsense. Not all Vastini are nice. They are in a they have made a deal with the devil, so they have some issues. But when we start talking about Vastini being generalized to all gypsies, that's a nonsense again in itself. The Vastini are one aspect of that stereotype, okay? And therefore, it is all right in a fictional game. It's perfectly fine. And also within the Curse of Strahd, you'll find there are Vastini who don't actually like Strahd and do very little for him. And there's in fact a Vastini member who is trying to work against him, but is trying not to get destroyed by him. Madame Ava is a good example of that. So it is not clear cut in any way whatsoever. The section that Fred was just talking about is page 185 to 190 of... Yeah, okay. Okay, all right. I will try to get page numbers in there for the written document for the patrons, so that when you see that, you've got a better idea of how much of that material is there. What's this? By the way, this was in Book of the Raven Candlekeep Mysteries, by the way. Okay, was it? Okay. Nice to Strahd. Look, I think one of the things that is good about this is they do spell out how Domains of Dread work, and they do explain that Dark Lords are not to be given pity. They are not misunderstood individuals. Okay, they are fundamentally flawed, and even if events in their lives had not played out the way they did, they still would have reached the same point. It's that fundamental flaw in them that means they are perfect as being a Dark Lord, that they are evil in nature. Okay, and that's the message there. Will you do a guide on the House of Lament? Probably not, because I feel like it is... frankly, there are better books out there that do haunted houses. And for a Wizards of the Coast book, it's an all-right adventure. It does all right. But if we take into consideration everything else that anybody else has done, it's not that great. So... maybe I'll feel differently. Maybe my players will say, Fred, we want to play the House of Lament and we want you to Dungeon Master it, and I do it. That might happen, but I don't know. I don't know. The count counts how many neck holes you have. Yeah, exactly. I love it. Nice. Grim Hollow campaign supplements reviews. No, I haven't. There's been a lot of people doing Grim Hollow. I'm not really touching it. I think there's enough people doing it. They don't need me. Castlevania. I think you're probably right, Jeremy and Dove. Yeah, Castlevania. I suppose it does have elements of Castlevania going on there. Yep, for sure. Okay, now I have to be quick, guys. I'm going to get these last two questions done, and then I do have to go because I'm supposed to be meeting AJ and No Fun Allowed and Roll for Initiative very shortly, and I still haven't sorted out his questions. And AJ asked curly questions. Here we go. I'm glad you like it, Justin. Good, that was good. Okay, so question from Negative Space. Hello. Can you think of a way to explain what level of horror this book and the Curse of Strahd book have? I'm not a big fan of horror, but I do like some things I've heard of Curse of Strahd. Curse of Strahd is Dracula. I would say Curse of Strahd is Dracula with other elements thrown in there. Many horror elements have been thrown in. Van Richten's Guide to Everything... Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft is, as I said, I would say it's a mixture of modern horror, which I don't like, modern horror movies or stories, a lot of older style stuff in there sprinkled with a bit of Scooby-Doo, Addams Family, Munsters, Count Chocula, Sesame Street, Count. There's a mixed bag in there. So yeah, in terms of the horror level, this is all over the place. But certainly tailored much for a much younger audience. Justin, question. I'm updating Kirill to the Loop Guru. Okay. Thoughts. Is it too much my players punch way above their weight class and need a better challenge? So Justin, the thing with Dungeons and Dragons 5e and a lot of the monster stat blocks that you get, you have to modify them significantly. Right now in my own game, I max out the hit points on all my monsters. I roll a 6-sided dice and I add that to every attack the monster makes, and I add that d6 number to the average damage the monster does. Okay, for all of them. I will often adjust things like the number of attacks that they have, because monsters just don't do enough attacks. So they might, instead of doing 2 attacks or 1 attack, they might have 2 attacks, or if they have 2 attacks, I'll give them 4 attacks. If they're on their own, and often monsters wind up not having like allies with them, then I will give them legendary actions. But legendary actions might look like anything that you can do in combat. It can be potentially a legendary action. So they can dodge, disengage, use the help action, dash, all that sort of stuff. I open that all up completely. Also, too, I don't just give my monsters that are on their own just legendary actions. They don't just get 3. I give them a legendary action for every single player. Every single player. So that this thing will do something at the end of everybody's turn, no matter what. And that compensates for the size of the group. And my group is still barreling through everything I throw at them. So I've still got to push the ante. So I know where you're coming from when you say this. Like, how do I make this work? Well, there's so many options now in Dungeons & Dragons 5e. It's actually very difficult to do so without rebuilding the monster completely. There are ways of doing it. I just don't know that I don't think anybody would have the balls to do it. I've done it before. It scared the bejesus out of my players, and I don't think that they were expecting it, particularly since they were like level 18 and they weren't expecting to get their asses handed to them. But I did build a monster, and I had to break all of the rules. I had to break every rule in the monster manual in terms of the guidance and sort of how things are built. I had to break all the rules in the Dungeon Master Guide. I had to break all the rules that I've seen on social media from Jeremy Crawford, Mike Merles, and Chris. I just had to throw everything out the window and just go for it. It's hard. I totally understand. I don't have the answer completely for you at this time. I'm sorry. Zenov, what did you think about the curses, fair stress mechanics in Van Richten's? They're all right. They're all right. Frankly, when I started reading through them, I got really bored. I didn't even read to the end of the sections. I started reading and I was like, yeah, okay. I guess that's a signal that maybe I didn't like them that much. I wasn't that interested in the slightest, actually. And I like curses. I like using curses in my game. I do it a lot. But anyway, I need to get going. Otherwise, I'm going to get into so much trouble. I'm supposed to start up a Zoom chat right about now, and I haven't done that. Okay, so thank you to everybody who showed up and put up with my very long rant, because good Lord, if this wasn't a rant, I don't know what is. I have tried to be as honest and as unbiased as I can, but like anything, you got to take it with a grain of salt. So thank you to everybody, whether you are, it's the morning, the afternoon, the night, or the early morning. Please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Be nice to your neighbours, and hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.